Hello, I'm Sarah Hayden. We're here at PortMedia Open Studios. This is a new concept that we have to bring people in from the community to interview people like Bill Sargent, who I have here today. Welcome, Bill. I'm glad you've been able to come on and speak to me about some of your books, and particularly Coastal Discoveries, which is your newer book.
My latest book, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually this book is a little bit of a departure from some of my other books. The last 4 or 5 books have all been about Plum Island and erosion. And I kind of think that debate is over, and we won. You know, 4 or 5 years ago, everybody was making the wrong decisions. Building seawalls, groins, you know, repairing the jetty, and they were increasing the erosion. Now, I think people have realized that that's the wrong thing to do, and now people are starting to work with nature. So they're using sand, and they're, you know, these are what are called green solutions as opposed to gray solutions.
Yes, I had. The name just fell right out of my head. Anyway, from the Audubon, and they were talking about how the salt marsh and stuff, what a barrier that is, and how important it is. And of course, we know from different parts of along the coast, all the way down to Louisiana, what's happened with that. But it's also interesting. And one of the things I know we keep local authors' books here. So when I see a local author, I try to buy up the book and put it on our shelves so people can have like a topic of conversation. You know, if they walk by and they go, oh, look at that local authors. So I did glance at online your book, but what I noticed was your trip up the coast, or down is it up or down? You know, along the coast.
Yes.
You've discovered a lot of animals that had seals and maybe some whales and things like that, and that was a discovery that you had made. Yeah,
so really, you know, this book was more looking at the natural history of the area, looking at the biology and the geology, and kind of trying to get away from the politics of erosion. So
you have a science background.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's, so, I mean, what were some of the things that you feel like you discovered, or maybe some conclusions that you've made?
Well, do you know how to sex a flounder?
Hold it up to the light?
Yes.
I heard that recently. Where did I hear that? But yes.
You might have heard it here.
Perhaps.
Right. Actually, I learned that.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm paying attention somewhere.
I was actually on a couple Russian fishing vessels doing fisheries research.
Oh, interesting.
The Blesk and the Belogorsk, and I learned how to sex a flounder.
Oh, how so, and that's important because
this was basic, you know, baseline data. So we were just trying to find out, you know, what the fish were and how many there were and whether they were males and females and that sort of thing.
So with your research that you've done when you were examining the coast, like the North Shore, right?
Right, yeah. The distressing thing that we found this summer was the hundreds and hundreds of dead seals. And they finally figured out that they were getting that from it's called a phocine distemper, similar to what a dog gets, but the seals get it. But even more distressing is the reason that they were susceptible to that is the water is absolutely full of PCBs. They actually stopped producing PCBs, you know, several decades ago, but they're still in the environment. So the seals are born with a compromised immune system, so they're susceptible to all of these.
This is terrible. So I remember it was David Moon from the Audubon that came in and had covered a lot of information too. It's very distressing.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, climate change is.
Yeah. And this past summer we had all kinds of things happening at once because. We're getting all kinds of algae, this red algae that was coming up. It looked like you had poured Pepto-Bismol up and down the beach. It was really
right around.
This was all on Plum Island, and
that's awful.
This is actually an invasive species that's come over from Japan, and came over on ballast down in Rhode Island, and then it's moved its way north, and so there's, you know, large beds of it just offshore, and then when you get a storm, it pushes it up on the beach. And we had, very high ridges of it. I mean, it was, and it holds itself together and you can't get through it. And then we were having the so-called CSOs, the combined sewer overflows that were coming down the Merrimack because it was such a wet summer, a whole wet year.
Yeah.
So we had, by the end of this year, there will be about 750 million gallons of untreated, sewage.
That is very gross.
Yeah, it's combined with the storm water.
Yes.
But it's still there.
We did do the presentation with Rusty Russell.
Yes, he's very good. Yes.
They went over, the guys went over and filmed most of that day over in Plum Island. So we have that.
Yeah.
I think I saw it on the board. It's not quite out because there were 4 different pieces.
Yeah.
And then we also did the storm surge.
Right.
And were you attending? You probably were there. So it was over here. So we did that as well. So those will be out, and those will be on our VOD for people to watch. And we did the originals, the one that Rusty came and talked with the mayor about the combined sewer overflow. So if people aren't familiar with that, they might want to check out those programs.
And actually, I have a piece that's going to be coming out fairly soon. What Boston did when they had, the Boston Harbor cleanup, they dug a tunnel, about a 12-mile long tunnel, to release the treated water out into Cape Cod Bay, and it's under what's called the thermocline. So that's the border that separates the warmer surface waters with the colder waters before. And if you get it underneath the thermocline, it will stay there for the 2 or 3 days that it takes for the natural processes to break it down. I know that the optics don't sound very good, and actually I wrote an article. We were living in Woods Hole at the time, and I was writing for the Cape Cod Times, and I wrote an article saying that there's a great big red herring that's swimming in Cape Cod Bay, because pretty much the whole environmental community didn't want the pipe, and I said, actually, you're better off with the pipe.
I remember that.
Yeah, because
the tags, and they had like bumper stickers and stuff.
Exactly. But you're better off because before that you were releasing untreated sewage in Boston Harbor, and it only took it 2 or 3 days to get out in the middle of Cape Cod Bay. And with the pipe, you were releasing treated water, which was almost drinkable water.
Wow.
And under the thermocline, and
because it would break down and become cleaner, or how?
No, it had already been cleaned.
Oh, I see.
It had already been cleaned. It had been through the wastewater treatment plant.
So is this something they're considering? I mean, I haven't heard of solutions with what's happening.
Well, so actually, Boston did this. London is following Boston's example. I like that that they're following our example for once. And they're building a 16-mile tunnel that's going to take their combined sewer overflows to a wastewater treatment plant that will then be treated. So we have the opportunity to have, if we build a tunnel, say in the Lawrence area, and take the combined sewer overflows, and then run it directly to the ocean, and either have a treatment plant that would treat it, or run it a half a mile or a mile out under the thermocline. And it's not the ideal solution, but it's a doable solution. It would be a whole lot cheaper than the 6 cities having to sort of redo their waste treatment plants.
Yeah, no, I've just heard whatever the solution is going to be very expensive.
Very expensive, and it's going to take a long time.
But it's expensive anyway.
It's the price of living in a civilized world, basically.
Yes, and we're ruining the environment.
Right.
So, I mean, gross.
Right. Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Yeah.
I mean, so when you were going along the coast, did you see a lot of plastic? Because of course now there's just more and more and more about plastic in the water. Of course.
Yeah, and after some of these storms, Plum Island was just covered with plastic, and
oh, we really have to get out and get some pictures.
And mattresses and everything. And then the thing that we found that was very creepy is we found some syringes. And at first we thought, well, somebody's dumping medical waste or something like that. And I finally traced it back, and it was kind of the creepiest story I've ever done. I went to, there are a number of encampments where there'd be about 30 drug addicts living under the abutments of bridges in Lawrence and Lowell and Methuen and various places like that. And each encampment would produce about 150 needles a day that they had been used. And when you walked along the shore, about every 4 feet there'd be another used syringe. And then what happens is, when you get a storm, those wash into the river and they float all the way down the river and they end up in Plum Island.
Well, this is distressing.
But it was very, very creepy because it was almost like everybody kind of looked like zombies, and they were, in the shade underneath these embankments. And then there were some monks that were. It's a new sect of Franciscan monks, and they were all fairly young, but they had these long gray cowls, and you thought like you were back in the 1400s.
Were they there to help?
They were there to help. They were there, and they've taken a pledge to live with the homeless.
Oh, interesting.
And they were, serving everybody orange juice and everything like that.
A pledge to live with the homeless.
Yeah, and to be homeless themselves.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Right. Yeah.
To learn about it, or
to help. I mean, they were there to help.
So, do you think these encampments? I mean,
are they still there? Yes.
Can they just deposit their needles in one receptacle?
That would be the ideal thing, and of course, a lot of people will say, well, you should get rid of the encampments, but these people would rather be there living beside the river than in a halfway house. They feel that it's safer, and they live in tents, and the tents are well secured. A lot of them are vets, and they're used to. And frankly, I mean, they're living in some of the best real estate in the cities. I mean, they're right in the parks. They're right on. I can kind of understand that.
Yeah.
But yes, there should be. There could be a system where you
Yeah, because that seems like if they're
kind of a no-brainer, really.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's gross. I haven't been, as I was saying to David Moon, I hadn't been to any of their programs.
Right.
Really, in the last, since I've really been here, or at our other location, because it's just been a lot of, time and learning and things like that.
Well, I'd much rather be writing about nice natural history things. And I've done that. Several of my books have done that. But then you find you have to come back 2 or 3 years later and look at the mess that we've made.
Well, I just have not been down to the beach.
Right.
And I used to go a lot. I used to walk a lot. But I know we were just talking about the Earthport Film Festival, which does every year. So I think we're going to be in our 7th year. I think this is our 7th year. And they're always films about the water, and every year more, and then they just did a big special. I think it was on 60 Minutes or something like that.
Yeah,
about
on the plastics.
Yes,
I saw that.
I have not seen it, and I can't. I'm so visual that it just disturbs me how much plastics and it's in all of the turtles and it's just so gross.
But you should still go down to the beach because it's beautiful.
I should go down to the beach. Yes, my son was a lifeguard for the last. He finished Mass Maritime this past year, but the year before and since high school he had been a lifeguard. So I was sort of banned from the beach, because I could bring him his iced coffee and his sandwich, but I didn't. I kind of avoided it because I didn't want to be walking along, and he,
Hi, Mom.
he was like, "Why are you going to the beach?" So I sort of gave up going to the beach. But I used to go, and I'd find a lot of sand dollars. I don't even know if you can find those anymore.
Oh yeah.
And some horseshoes and things like starfish.
Horseshoe crabs.
And then some starfish.
Horseshoe crabs, that's my totemic animal. I've written a couple books about horseshoe crabs.
Yeah, there was a saying on one of your books about the horseshoe crab.
Protect the life you save may be your own, because A quart of horseshoe crab blood is worth about $30,000, and they use it as a test for gram-negative bacteria. So whenever you get a flu shot or an intravenous fluid or have surgery, anything that's going to come in contact with the human blood system has to be checked to make sure that it's free of pyrogens. And the way they do that is with the horseshoe crab test.
Unbelievable.
So they're by far and away, the most valuable marine animal that we have.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Are they endangered? I mean, I'm sure plastic's not helping.
They're not so much affected by plastics, but they are. They're often used for bait, which is kind of ridiculous because if you cut them up and use them for bait, they're worth about 30 cents a pound. If you keep them alive and use them for these biomedical purposes, each crab is worth about $5,000 or $6,000.
Wow.
But that is also, for years they were saying that there was no mortality because you catch them in the wild and you bring them in and you bleed them and there should be no mortality. But we found under industrial conditions the truck doesn't show up and they're left out in the sun and you can get up to 50% mortality.
Oh dear.
Yeah, yeah.
That's too bad. So you had also mentioned some different kinds of sea life that you found that was affected by, I don't know, climate change or something. Right, the pollution that we were talking about before, but it was not just seals. You said that
there were a number of whales that died this summer, and you probably, actually the cover of my book it's an incredible shot that was taken by Diane Seavey.
It's very cool.
And she was only about 30 feet. She was on Salisbury Beach, and the whales were maybe 40 feet away from her. And
my goodness.
So she has this shot looking right down the throat of a humpback whale. And
That's cool.
They're feeding on menhaden. So you can see the menhaden are jumping out of the water in front of the whale.
Wow.
But they were coming in much closer than they have in other years. And it's actually, I've been writing about, some of the Native Americans who are living here, and they would get stranded whales, and they would occasionally go out and kill whales themselves. They go out in the dugout canoes, and they would spear
They're
sleeping
so huge. I don't know how they could possibly kill a whale.
Well, it was sort of the way the white men learned it from the Indians, and they would spear them, and then they would have bladders that would be attached, that would tire the whale, which I'm on the whale side.
I'm on the whale side too. That's an interesting thing because Dan Lieberman, who is, are you familiar with Dan? So he's in Harvard.
Newburyport, of course, was based on the whale trade for a while. They had a small fleet here, and they did very well.
Oh, that's interesting. But he has done some research on, how did, when we became upright creatures, how did we survive when the instrument of killing wasn't made for many years later, and it was that tiring out that they would run the animals, and it's the same thing to heat exhaustion. Oh, it's terrible.
It is terrible. It's
terrible.
Yeah, I know.
It's just terrible. I'm for the animals too.
I think one of the reasons I'm always very disturbed when you see where coyotes, for instance, have taken down a deer, and it's just awful because that the deer has been struggling and
it's awful.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
I won't go into the details, but I think part of the reason that it affects us so much is that was the way we used to kill things too.
Yeah, it's possible, but it is that struggle.
Yeah.
It's really disturbing. When I did listen to Dr. Lieberman's presentation, and there's it's on Netflix. I think it's called something about us. Our evolution of us, or something like that. And it just shows them running this poor animal until it just can't run anymore.
Yeah. Well, we're the best animal in terms of long distance running. I mean, we've evolved to be marathon runners.
Yes.
Most of the other animals, they have short bursts, and they're very, very fast. But we can just
Yeah.
just stay with them for days and days and days. And
That's terrible.
Yes. How did we get it? That was your question.
I don't know how we went around to that, but I did. I'm not even aware.
I'll tell you
how
the good thing about horseshoe crabs is that they are now developing a way to use gene splicing to make the what's called limulus amebosate lysate artificially, and so that will take the pressure off of horseshoe crabs. And the other thing about horseshoe crabs is that there are a lot of endangered species of birds that are, feed on the horseshoe crab eggs. So, for instance, there's a bird called a red knot, and 80% of all the red knots in the world will be on the Delaware beaches for about 3 weeks. And then they eat 40 tons of horseshoe crab eggs, and that gives them
Wow.
the fuel to make the next part of their flight up to the Arctic Circle.
Good Lord. Have you ever sat down and talked to David Moon? Because
Yes,
you two have
sure.
a lot of knowledge about the
Right.
world.
Yeah,
It's really something, because
Yeah.
he went on about...
He handles the birds, and I handle
Well,
the
he
other.
was
Yeah.
talking about coyotes, and we got talking about other animals,
yeah.
and I was like, oh, you seem
Yeah.
to know a lot about all these
Well,
things.
you know how marine biologists separate their birds, don't you?
I don't know.
Big brown birds, little brown birds, and owls. It makes it very easy.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, I think it's just really important to be able to share information about the environment, and so now, like, what do you feel is an important thing to be doing for climate change, or what should we be doing?
Well, locally, I think the big issue now is the river. And I'm actually starting to write more and more about the river, from its source way up. I don't know if you're familiar with Echo Lake, which is...
I'm actually not. But
well, it's in Franconia Notch, right
I'm
below.
familiar with that.
Yeah.
Actually, I do know Echo Lake.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And if you lie on your back in Echo Lake in the summer, the water closest to your feet dribbles out of one side of the lake and becomes the Pemigewasset, that then becomes the Merrimack River. And the water towards your head goes out the other side of the lake and becomes the Connecticut River.
Huh.
But the Connecticut River is about twice as long as the Merrimack River. So it meanders slowly down through, western Massachusetts and, exits out in
Echo Lake is not very big, so
No.
there's springs under there, or is that?
Does
it come from the mountains?
It's water coming from the mountains.
I've hiked for years. We have
Right.
a home up in Randolph, New Hampshire, and
Right.
I get up there and I just think, where is this water starting? Like,
Right.
where is it starting from?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
see the
it's-
river, and then some of them
Yeah.
are so full of
It's
water.
just lots of little freshets and rivulets, coming down off the mountains.
Those are two good words. I'm not familiar with those two words.
They're just small streams.
Yeah, because if you're on the top of the mountain, it's dry.
Right. Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
to see the start of the
Yeah. Well, in the,
the
spring,
river.
you'll see more of them. And then, of course, the other thing that's happening is, all the minerals from the mountains, as the mountains are eroding, you're getting, garnets and magnetite and silica and everything like that, and that collects in the river, and that goes out, and that's what Plum Island is made from, those, from all of that sand that started in the mountains.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then you get the beautiful designs on, if you go down to the end of Plum Island, down at Sandy Point, you get the beautiful designs after a high tide. That the tide and the wind will winnow the sand, and you'll get,
I have to get out.
Yes, yeah.
I've got to get out of this studio and see nature
I can
again.
see your chains.
Yes. Well, it's this thing here. It's a little chain, but I'll be in big trouble if I pull myself away from it. Oh yes, it's over here.
Right.
Well, we've been trying to work on connecting the media center with the Constitution, freedom of speech, and I think personally that's how media center should be going. That
Sure.
we're
Yeah.
very fortunate because we have the radio. And
Yeah.
we started this Packet Post, which is like a citizen journalism blog on our website. Slow, but we're working on it. And then we have the channels, and we have the VOD, and we're streaming all of our channels.
Right.
So if people aren't watching TV, they can go on our website and they can
Right.
see anything at any time. But anyway, so my idea of like, oh, I was only going to do this for a few years, and we'll see what comes up next, and this interest in the Foch and everything. But this First Amendment stuff and the journalism and how I just feel it's the most important thing.
Yeah, democracy can only exist through freedom of expression.
So I just felt like this is a very important endeavor, and I had wanted to add more things about the Constitution, but when we got here, and coincidentally before the current administration with their attitude towards journalists, and it's been brewing too, this whole, I've heard of a new website, or maybe it's an app you can get to listen to the news from both sides. Well, news isn't a side. News is information, unbiased information, and we do watch a lot of entertainment news.
Yeah, and particularly in science.
It's just brutal.
There really aren't often two sides to a story. You have the consensus where you have, with climate change, for instance, you have 98% of the scientists believe in climate change and believe that it's caused by human activity, and there's a few kooks on the fringes who are trying to make the counter argument, but when you give them equal time, you're presenting a false story.
Yeah, it's really exhausting. I am fascinated with. And grateful there are people interested in becoming journalists, and interested in reporting on things, and
science journalism. I'll put a plug in for that. Yes, I think it's very important. So many decisions that we make now you have to have some knowledge of science. You have to be able to know how to weigh things, and
I know that I get the blog or information from the Society for Environmental Journalists, and I know that they, in this past fall, they did their conference in Flint, Michigan.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I had gone out to Flint. I know we've gone all around now on all these stories, but I had gone out because there was a gentleman who sent a song, a rap that he created about the river. And the water, the whole water situation, and he had tried to just send it out to any access center that he could find the address, because he felt the story was being dropped. And this was a handful. We were at the other site. It was a while back, and so I'd got in touch with them, and it turns out that the way their contract was designed in Michigan, and which has happened across the country, is that a lot of access centers were eliminated, and theirs was one of them in Flint that they used to do a lot of production. It was completely gone, and no one sort of they just didn't even know where it went. And it just got more and more interesting, and I actually went out to Flint and met him and looked at the river and found the only person that does access is like more of an individual who does the government access. But it's really fascinating. There's just so little information you can get about meetings and things, and people don't realize what they could be missing if they're not able to see these meetings.
Sure. Yeah.
So I mean, even with our our state and our federal government, we should have 24/7 access on a channel at all times, whether it's on an app or whatever it is. There should be media coverage 24/7 on all decisions, period, so we know what's going on. And it's like we have to fight for that. Colorado does have that kind of system, which I think is amazing. And I did try to get in touch with Katie Ives and Jim Kelcourse and all of them. And if you're listening, you can think about it. And I said, this is something that could be really wonderful for our state to have access to the State House and all the meetings and all the everything that you do. And of course, it's almost like, oh no, we don't want that. So you're like, well, you're working for us. Sure. And this is what people seem to forget. So anyway, I think that. So a good takeaway for our conversation, we've gone on a lot of topics, but would be, maybe you could give a couple of ideas of how people in our community can be supportive of efforts that will help improve our environment and our, environmental condition here in Newburyport. The river.
There's a number of nonprofit organizations that a lot of them have cropped up fairly recently. Storm Surge, I think people have heard of. Plum Island Outdoors has some wonderful. It's mostly photographs, but you can every day there's wonderful photographs of the island, as well as stories and sort of the status of the island. And of course, the Merrimack River Watershed Council
Yes.
that Rusty has started are all very important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they are sort of pushing the elected officials, and I've been very impressed with the elected officials here. I cover and sit in on the Merrimack River Beach Users Alliance. And it's very well run, and you get everybody is sitting at the same table in the same room, and I think that's why that debate has been resolved, because everybody has been part of that.
Mm-hmm.
You
mean resolved in terms of that there is.
Well, the people are starting to
There is
do
a
the right
yes.
things, and I think I remember when I first started writing about coastal erosion, and I was talking to a scientist down at Woods Hole, and he said it takes about 5 years for a community to get educated, and I thought he was just sort of throwing that out, and it was an exaggeration, but he's right that it's taken us about 5 years to go from making all the wrong decisions, and we saw what happened in March 2013, when we lost 6 or 7 houses and about 30 were condemned.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yeah. And then everybody rushed to build often illegal seawalls and throwing up all these defenses that have
washed away.
They've washed away, and there's kind of an incredible situation where the DEP has looked the other way because they're afraid they'd be sued, and allowed people to build houses on exactly the same footprint, where the house was washed away, and the houses haven't even been finished yet. And they're attacked, and they're losing garages and everything like that. And then on the other end of the island, where everybody's been, following the rules and everything like that, they can't put little cement blocks on to try to prevent to help build the dune and keep the water out of the streets and away from the homes, which I actually think is right. You shouldn't do that, but you should have a uniform system, so that one half of the island isn't getting away with murder, and the other half is following the rules and getting screwed.
Yeah, I can certainly see how salt marshes and that kind of the vegetation, everything that is natural along shores and rivers and things like that helps to absorb and buffer.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
And the island itself. But the thing about a barrier beach is it has to be able to move. It's almost like a living organism. And it will take the brunt of a storm, and then it rearranges it, and it actually will build back. But once you put houses or permanent, solid structures, and then it can't move, it can't flex, and that's when you get the problems.
Yeah, well, it's definitely challenging for those who own property out there, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, this has been very interesting, Bill. I'd like to say thank you for taking the time and talking with me, and I'm sure we'll talk again. Do you have any final words of wisdom?
No, just I think the most important is that people keep educating themselves.
Yeah, I'd say you're right.
And there are a number of forums now to do that, and they're all they're getting very large audiences. So I think we're on the right track.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't matter what's happening down in Washington, as long as we're starting to take care of things down here. I will mention that one of my books was called Plum Island to Palm Beach, and the last chapter ends up at Mar-a-Lago, which is the winter.
That I did read in your book. We have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was kind of creepy because there was absolutely no security.
Yeah.
I ended up, I was taking pictures, and I was kind of in this little hedge, and I took a couple more steps, and boom, I was right on the front lawn.
Wow.
And unless there were some SWAT teams up there
Yeah.
that I didn't know about, finally a groundskeeper came over and said, this is private property and you'll have to leave, and so
Yeah.
I left. But I think that's changed now.
Yeah. Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, people who do have these big, beautiful beachfront, they've talked about it in Miami. It's just now they're all trying to move back, and
Right.
and all the people who didn't have a lot of money are in those areas that were who no one
Right.
wanted to live there, and now, of course, everybody wants to
That's
live there.
right, yeah,
So
yeah.
well, things do change.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Bill.
Well,
It's
thank
nice
you.
to meet you and have a conversation. And even though there's more things to worry about, but I think it's good to learn and try to be involved as much as possible.
Good.
So
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again.